Hi guys. So I can see people are all coming in. I'm just gonna wait for 2 more minutes. I hope all of y'all are doing well during this quarantine period. We're gonna just salute the COVID warriors. Take a moment of silence for all the recent victims at the typhoon that happened in the Bay of Bengal. I hope everyone can hear me. Okay, great. Okay, so I'm gonna start with first of all introducing what the Creative Toli is all about and who my position in the Creative Toli. So I'm Kashav Bora. I'm the co-founder at Creative Toli. The Creative Toli is a one-stop DC creative industry network, a platform where creatives can connect for free. They can get in touch with each other, work on passion projects, get in touch with clients, work with work projects, and the idea is to create a cross-collaborative platform of sorts where people can get together and they can work. And the idea was to keep it completely free, let the creatives learn, earn, and grow together. Uh, so you can read more about our ticketers and our website. You can log in. It's a free sign up, so I hope to see more creative people coming there. I think I can see Saurabh already waiting, so I'm just going to quickly introduce him. So our principal architect of Archvision Studio is Saurabh Mhatre. He's uh, he's a graduate of the prestigious Bartlett School of Architecture. He has a master's in urban design, and he's currently also conducting a study in architecture and urban design at Rachna Sansar Academy of Architecture. Hi, Saurabh there. Hi, Saurabh.
Hi, hi, hi. How are you doing?
Namaste. Namaste is a new trend now.
Okay, namaste, namaste.
All right.
I
So
was, I
I'll
was going to say,
give
like,
you.
how are you, my fellow inmate? Like, how does it feel to be imprisoned without
Oh,
doing anything? Like
it's a completely different built environment we are living in now.
it's
So,
relative.
Saurabh, I've already given a brief introduction about you. I guess
Okay.
people would like to hear a bit more about yourself. So why don't you say a few words and your journey so far, how architecture came to you, and
Yeah. So basically, I'm a trained architect and I've specialized in urban design from the Bartlett School of Architecture. And basically, as a simple idea of journey of understanding or realizing what architecture is or what the built environment is and what is the responsibility of what I hold as a professional in that kind of phase, in this kind of contained profession is that it was a whole journey of what I term as professional what do you say monogamy of like trying to understand what people have already done previously and trying to delve deep into the works of some architects' works who I fell in love with over a journey of me being a student of architecture over the 5 years or 7 years, including the masters that I was
hmm,
in. And then it's like trying to get deep into the depths of each one's work, and then trying to get the like the most critical questioned. And once you start understanding the kind of basic assumptions or the root assumptions that a particular architect has based his practice on, it starts kind of peeling out like an onion, and
correct?
everything starts to crumble, and then you can almost like direct your practice into this new idea of innovation. And that's basically what I as a studio or I as a practice or I through academics try to do with the students that we collaborate with, or the kind of various practicing orders or stakeholders that we kind of engage with in our everyday practice. That what is it that we can innovate, and what is it that we can look ahead to as a responsibility towards this profession. So quickly
Correct.
trying to, one of the biggest inspirations I can say was architect Ram Kullas, and the fact that he had a background of journalism, which again is quite valid in the idea of collaborating disciplines and understanding from various disciplines how we can learn. So due to his kind of background of journalism, it was quite interesting that most of the projects or most of the works that they kind of performed were like, or they kind of engaged in, were like some things that were driven by either political, social, or technological situations, and those kind
Correct.
of situations
A
that
lot of external influences,
are,
basically.
are are valid kind of start shaping architecture from more than just the standalone art kind of discipline that it was believed to be, and starts engaging into understanding what it starts responding to become what the built environment and the questions that we kind of raise as a collective society in the built environment start kind of shaping up,
Correct.
and that's
Correct.
pretty much
So
the
I guess
direction.
that's where your story for urban design and your niche for urban design came about.
Yeah, true. Because that's exactly what. So most of the studio work, or most of the work that, again, mainly trying to, it's more than building the realities of the projects. It's trying to understand or research that what things or what directions of the future could be. And so
Correct.
mostly I always use this phrase, and I tell everyone that it's mostly the architectural manifestation, is the lingering thoughts of architectural manifestation rather than its completeness, which always keeps me driven towards trying to find what uh, what are the answers of tomorrow, what are the futurescapes of tomorrow, trying to understand what are the most relevant built environments of tomorrow. And it's like it's something like it's difficult to innovate the future without really knowing the past. So like the idea of speculation is very interesting, but what I'd like to term it as retro speculation. It's like trying to look back and then trying to look ahead at
Correct.
the same time, kind of brings about a lot of relevance in practice, and which is quite essential, I feel, because sometimes that's what there's always a very open conversation about what exactly, till what limit is copying in architecture. Like, can someone actually copy someone's work? And then, but it's trying to understand what maybe it's like humanity exists on this whole idea of collective knowledge that we've been building
Correct.
over whatever kind of period of time, and then moving ahead we have to keep building on it, but it's impossible to see the reflections of what have happened beyond, and then trying to tweak them just correctly in order to kind of
Take it
predict
ahead.
a future or speculate a future or anticipate a future that we can draw out and things like that.
Okay, so I
So
guess based on uh, the past inspiration that you've had, the study that you've done so far, your 5 years of architecture and the 2 years of masters, I think you've already found a niche in urban design. But I think there's also an aspect where I'm sure obviously you've learned this much more in detail, and you'll be knowing exactly where the history of the built environments and how they began. How did people come to this term of built environment? How where did it begin for you or begin for the
yes,
people as a journey? Could you help us understand a bit more about what built environments are basically?
yes. So quickly, like if I have to like it's really difficult to actually summarize it, but I thought of a very interesting way in which I always kind of introduce built environment. It's quite a repetitive thing which I kind of use in most of my paycheck pictures and things like that. But I think this is the way in which, the most pictographical way in which I can explain the built environment, which I will do now. So basically, I try to narrate the idea of the built environment through two objects. And the first object is it's basically the oldest possible object that humans ever possessed. It's basically a rock with a sharp edge. Okay, it
Okay.
was it is kind of if you go to the British Museum in London, you'll see it. It's a physical evidence of this object being retrieved from Tanzania, which is like supposed to be the cradle of human evolution. There's a
Oh,
particular
wow.
thing called the Olduvia Gorge, in which this kind of Neolithic start of human race kind of started. And what is really interesting about this object is that this sharp object, which was probably, is if you go to the British Museum, they'll tell you this whole story about how this object was made by clanging another object and making an object sharp. But what is interesting is that that is exactly the point where human imagination started to manifest. And human imagination is the fact that this kind of object, the sharp tool that they wanted in order to maybe chop things better or cut things better, or like try and hunt or try and kind of tear through something or something like that. This particular object, which is so interesting, is that it started kind of shaping the world around them. And what is interesting that not that humans realize that the thing that they were doing was not only shaping the world around them, but the world around them started shaping. So they started building culture, it started building sociology, it started building these various factors. And this is particularly the start from where, it's the most interesting point from where human manifestation of building something or trying to create an environment tailored around their imagination, their kind of persistence of what they felt that the world should be. And so if I have to kind of take this narrative ahead, like the 2001 A Space Odyssey movie kind of thing, and then that point where those apes took those bones and were clanging it on each other's head, and then the kind of evolution which goes into this kind of space travel and the next level of human race, like going beyond and trying to understand everything that's beyond the Earth. So the next object is like the International Space Station. Okay, that's like by far the most expensive, the most sophisticated, the most interesting object that is ever created by humans as of now, and is basically a pod which kind of contains humanity in order to understand and do various spatial experiments which will help us understand the world beyond us. And what this does is like it is by far the object which is trying to show that this new world, that the new manifestation of a completely self-sustaining, self-controlled world that exists and which is being built around what humans understood as designing something that is around a measure that is completely controlled by them. So trying to kind of build this trajectory between these two objects is that so the first object I talk about is where the natural environment kind of existed, and then humans just created the first tool in which they could start kind of manipulating that first, manipulating this natural environment in order to make it tailored around them so that it could start becoming the built environment that they built. And the International Space Station is like the epitome of that built environment. Like everything is completely controlled by humans, by the human control that is assertive in all orders, and it's so controlled that it keeps you in this pod in order that you need the basic life support that you need to sustain in an environment, or like it's rotating around space in which you're not naturally supposed to exist. So that's the level of which I can take as a span between to understand what built environment means in totality, like from the origin of it to like the most sophisticated object that is made. And so this whole thing and everything that happened between these two things is what I define as design, and what I define as what design impacted in order to build what the built environment is. And what's interesting is that due to everything that we're seeing in the world, from sociological conflicts to climate change to these kind of
effects,
which are affecting various other factors like the virus sprawl and everything that's happening today, are kind of outcome of this over designed and over thing. And then what we use, like it's the new geological age in which we live, is the Anthropocene, in which we try to believe in the fact that we have more control over the natural environment.
Things around us. Correct.
So it's almost like looking at it like in a way in which it's not. First, we started by shaping, like it's almost like it's not that life shapes us. It's like we have started shaping the life around us, and that's the kind of authoritarian control that we are having on the built environment, and that's why it's valid to understand what we have created as the built environment, and it's because
Correct. So I
if you
think
think about, yeah, if
we've got an interesting question from Dhruv, who's watching us right now. He's asking what is the most primitive space as per you? You know, where is the most primitive space according to your perspective or your thought?
the primitive space is the totality of the natural environment. That's pretty much where we were without ever, like, even a cave is not primitive. It's something
Correct.
that the human, like anything that is influenced by human imagination and has started to like kind of evolve around the human imagination is something that I feel is not like, that's the basis where everything started. Not like the most primitive space is probably where there was the least imagination to the fact that today we see the International Space Station, which is like the most imagined idea of what we see
Yes. Yes. That's true.
so the most primitive start is the fact that the total natural environment that probably, I don't know, humans came from where, I don't know. Whether we evolved from monkeys, I don't know, or we were dropped into the space, I don't know. But that point where humans were in the envelope of the natural environment in totality, without their imagination starting to like give them any kind of stimulus to start building something that is tailored around them, is
Correct.
is the,
Correct. Correct.
is the origin of everything that we have. So that's what I was trying to
Okay.
add, was that probably the most interesting thing is that what we feel is the built environment as the most natural thing, like cities, roads, buildings, what we see, and houses that we live in, and everything that we see, airports and stuff like that. It has come out of an abstract idea, and it's the most synthetic thing possible, which we today believe is the most natural thing, because we've been
Correct.
born
Correct. We've all
and
that
like,
way.
we've always been in that kind of thing. But it
Correct.
has at some point developed out of an abstract idea, and it has developed out of human imagination, and it's the by far the most synthetic. It's the most synthetic thing that can ever kind of manifest us, and that is by far the most simple way in which I can say everything that human imagination has created is that one particular one molecule that kind of
Correct. Correct.
contributes to
Correct.
the larger built environment. And,
The larger picture. Correct.
yeah,
Correct.
the picture.
So today, considering the environment we live in, the
Yeah,
way we have been brought up, it's been like what 30 years for us
yeah, yeah.
since we've been here. I guess is there sort of a timeline that has evolved over a certain number of years that has helped understand and deploy these built environments in certain factors or certain arrangements?
Means obviously every kind of the point where like if you try and understand architecture to be, architecture is actually a very recent profession. It's not as old as medicine or any of this. It's quite a recent profession in which this discipline was recognized in order that we start studying something that we start, because architecture, what people, it's a general notion that you always see the build form at the end and you think that that's a discipline of understanding and building and organizing, but it is reflective of a lot of other studies which are relevant, that is sociological studies, understanding humanities, understanding how various cultures kind of evolved, understanding how various points in human culture existed. From, like, if you understand, there was a hippie culture at one point. Before that, people lived in various other ways in which were different. Like the Industrial Revolution happened. Due to the Industrial Revolution happened, the way in which people performed their work was different. So every kind of human
It,
invention
every
kind
period.
of created various ways in which various organizations of how human societies configured themselves happen. And in order to
Correct.
understand how these organizations work and how these organizations kind of conducively kind of work together is when architects started understanding that there is a need for such a discipline, and understanding that planners need to come in order to plan how, because larger number of people started clustering together, there was a larger outward perspective that was needed to understand how these
Correct.
things
Correct.
kind of evolve.
Correct.
And that's exactly what gave birth to to these organizational patterns, which were reflective of sociological, cultural, economic, technological advancements that happen at different ages. Like if I have to give you an example of the fact that like industrial revolution gave birth to the home. Like there was no distinction between before the industrial revolution, that there was an idea of a workspace and there was an idea of a home where you lived. Like it was one thing, because previously, before to that, people were artisans. People created
Correct.
work in their confinement that they didn't define as home. It was what they kind of sheltered in, and that's how artisanal practices happened before. And which, when the industrial revolution came, is where mass manufacturing started, and everything was around that kind of fact that people realized, okay, now I have to go to do work, so this is my place of work, and then where I exist and do my other kind of daily routines and course is the place where I live. So that became the home. Basically,
Correct. So segregation,
that
a
segregation
segregation
came,
of thought.
yeah. The kind of segregation
Correct.
came out of the whole idea of the industrial revolution. So, and again,
Okay.
if you look
So
at it again, today we are going back to
yeah, exactly. I was just going to come to that.
all
That
savaging back.
yeah. No, I'm saying that's exactly what's going to come to that. A lot of the
Yeah.
things that you mentioned right now also, I think, gives a lot more importance to the physical aspect of existence. We always concentrated more on the physical well-being of our environment. How much does this affect adversely or inadversely towards a mental state of mind? So that we're moving on to the next sort of subject, probably phasing into it. Are there some sort of illustrative ideas you can give us, or how
Yeah,
would that sort of
yeah. Actually, I'll start by kind of making people, like, the most important thing is that people should be aware of the fact that like the state of mind is actually very relevant and it is completely responsive to the idea of how you are in the built environment, or how the built environment kind of creates a vessel for you, and those kind of uh, the mental health of the being in that in is directly relative to the idea of how the built environment kind of impacts you. And
okay,
I feel like, see, it's we as humans have evolved to a particular limit that we can kind of trace, and all the evolutionary theories that kind of exist. And we basically, what I always start, so that people get the background of what it is, so that we are built of like a biological DNA, which is what we call collective knowledge. The collective knowledge not only gets possessed in books and built things and scriptures and stuff like it. It's collective knowledge that a cell possesses. Like there's this biological cell. Okay, so this particular thing that exists in us kind of creates a neurological response which is quite universal. Like it's whether it's you,
okay,
whether it's me, whether it's anyone else. Like if a certain physical thing comes in touch with us, that kind of creates a kind of neurological response which creates a particular state of mind, or it triggers a particular pocket of your brain in order to kind of trigger a particular sensation, to trigger a particular emotion, trigger a particular kind of memory, or anything that is there which is relevant to what we have experienced. And so sometimes pain could be pleasurable to someone, sometimes pain could be very depressing to someone, pain can be elevating to someone. But the fact
correct,
that you feel pain is the fact that you are responsive to that biological DNA or the collective memory that exists in yourself. But the kind of emotional trigger that happens to you is out of this kind of experience, or a kind of various memories that you kind of possess in your
So,
existence.
for example, maybe something like seeing vegetation outside your window when you're working, or
Yeah.
some particular feature or part of you around that affects your thinking and your
That's
perspective
exactly right.
towards. Correct.
Exactly. That's very true. That's correct. So it's basically everything that you connect with your memory. So your built environment has a direct reflection onto what your mental state could be. So uh, what the built environment, what you do through the built environment is basically you sleep, you eat, you kind of commute through it, you kind of go to a place of work where you work, then you kind of consume some kind of thing, like you consume the built environment. That is like through going and visiting theater, going and visiting various cultural activities, going and eating in a restaurant. So you're consuming the built environment. And I'll give you, like, I think one of the most interesting books that I think that you all can, I think everyone can kind of look at, is by this architect called Vani Palasma, and it's called The Eye of the Skin, basically, which tells that every kind of neurological response in your body kind of creates something. So for a quick, simple example to kind of explain this instead of making it too complicated is like, see, if you're, why are there like steel railings in a hospital as compared to wooden railings in a library? It's because there is a reflection of a built environment which is completely different. Like, okay, I understand that in a hospital it's easier to maintain and clean things, so it has to be steel. But the fact that what it does is very important, is that that's a place where you need to feel that emotion of kind of feeling sad due to loss, or being in a very compromised situation emotionally. So what happens when you kind of hold onto a steel metal rail is that it gives you the chills and it brings out that emotion which is required. And that kind of it's not about just talking about physical, and I'm trying to break it down to a small element about what the built environment is, as compared to what if you go to a library, most of the things that you see, the materiality that you see is wood and warm, and that because you want to feel comfortable in that space so that you can engage with that piece of knowledge for the longest time, that we can derive information out of. So these kind of things. So these kind of things are very very important, that we start getting aware that the built environment has such a large impact on the state of our mind. And
correct. Which I think it engulfs both a positive and a negative effect, because as far as I can see, there are positive parts about living in city life, the comfort, the travel comfort that we have, the kind of infrastructure that's around us. It's obviously also for our complementary, pleasure, or for a viewing betterment, or for our comfort at home, or the ergonomics that we put into it. But I think it also has a negative part to it, right? Because that's exactly where the mental health and the state of mind would sort of come in. And I think I have a sort of related question to this by Studio Node. They say in today's design era, where you have a lot of Pinterest and Instagram, what has been the positive and negative impact on mental response to the space design? So how is that sort of, coherent in today's time?
Like in, as in, I think that's exactly what I like. That's one of the most important things I feel in one. Like I don't know if I'll be answering it directly, but in a way in which I feel that some of the experiments that we're doing is like one of the direction of practices that we are trying to take is that we're trying to speculate and create drawings, and trying to what Instagram and Pinterest does is kind of creates a simulation of what it is without really being in the physical environment. It's about it's about stimulating virtuality as compared to the real physicalness of what we kind of get stimulated to. And that's actually a completely different trajectory of thought. If you read this book called Simulacra and Simulation, which is by John Baudrillard, who's a great writer and architect, and he talks about how there is a certain, like, I think if you make your body devoid of every kind of thing, and if you just continue with the mind, if the mind just continues to exist, you can continuously live with these simulations or these stimulations in the kind of virtual world that we exist.
Virtual world, that's true.
But the physical world that we kind of recognize today, it's like the most important thing. Like today, everyone's craving for physical contact, or meeting someone, or going out, not just living in the simulation that we build around, that we think that is the mind is constructing. And so getting back to a few interesting things that I feel that we're doing in studio, or through research, or through what we engage with students is, first we are trying to participate through drawings, like a few speculative drawings in which we used to draw out futurescapes, then try and build or construct scenarios around those futurescapes. And then
Okay.
now what we're trying to do is, it's quite interesting, is like we're trying to build these kind of scenarios. So when you draw out a scenario of, like, say, probably a drawing of this order or something in that, it's something again that is again constructed, and it's an image which needs to kind of it's an image which is out of my imagination or my kind of
Perspective and your thought. Correct.
right?
Correct.
Or it might be collective out of a student. But what it does is it does not let the actor actually participate in the space. So what we're trying to do is each of these futurescapes we are trying to model into like virtual platforms, trying to get VR to like kind of participate with like multiple of the users existing in that. So experiments are going more personal now, and
Correct.
trying
Correct.
to like, be
You're
in that space and see how these various protagonists in the space kind of interact with each other, and how their impacts kind of tweak these imaginations, that a personal imagination of an architect or an urban designer or an urban planner kind of start tweaking those things, or they kind of, it's almost like leaving a block of clay for like 20 people, and like everyone
Hmm.
trying to put their finger in it, which makes them more
Correct.
personal for them, and then
Correct.
trying to see the overall outcome of what gets made out of that clay, rather than me molding that clay that self and then trying to feed it
Correct.
to someone.
So
And that is
everybody
why,
tries to
yeah.
reimagine it in their own perspective,
Exactly,
basically.
exactly. And that is by far the most important thing I feel as practice that is required in that collective, like you can build something, but it has to be tested. Like my vision, or a kind of a utopian vision, the reason why most of the 60s and the 50s utopian vision by most of the architects, they failed because they were drawn and then they were implemented without them being tested. Maybe they didn't have the
Tested.
tools to, but they need to be tested. Like they can be tested through drawings, which is like the basic skill of an architect or an artist, or anything that you can engage with, or you can pin it up and then someone can mentally engage in it and then respond to you. But now if you
Correct.
have the tools of actually being or stimulating yourself in a space, so that's where physical and virtual kind of get, you kind of put the hands together, and you can
Distinguished.
kind of
Correct.
see how those kind of affect the things, and then the resultant outcome will be not you, but it will be the society, and that I think is
Okay.
by far the most interesting thing that can happen. And
Okay. Okay. Is there any other example that you just showed, like any other illustration which could sort of
yeah, before I show an illustration, I think one of the most interesting things I forgot to say while talking about mental state
yeah,
is like
sure, sure, sure.
the movie Joker, which starred Joaquin Phoenix right now. I think by far one
Oh,
of the most
lovely.
interesting examples of understanding what the built environment is relative to the state of mind. And I think that the protagonist, the whole idea, then the fact that the everything that the mental state that was described of that act of that character, the Joker, wouldn't have
Hmm.
existed if the setup was not of the city. So if you, there's a very interesting video of the art direction that was done, or the production designing which was done of the movie,
Okay.
and why they
Okay.
selected 1981, the scenario of 1981 New York as the
As the
backdrop.
era.
And
Okay. Okay.
if you read about 1981 New York, which was by far one of the worst years that happened in New York, as the kind of the crime rates were high, the kind of public authorities were on a strike, people were like literally rampaging and killing each other, and everything that happened. But it was conducive of what the built environment threw at them, and the mental state that people were in because of the built environment in which they existed. And the fact that that kind of setup was so important, if that same movie was kind of narrated with the backdrop of like Switzerland and the Alps or something like that, it wouldn't kind of say the story,
Same
because
impact.
that's the
Correct.
best
Correct.
example you can give how relevant the built environment is towards the state of mind. And even the fact that in
Right.
that whole video, it's quite interesting that what made that the famous walk of the Joker was that the director suggested that there was no topography. There was no topography in that whole thing. So they thought of shooting it in East Bronx, and the drudgery of that everyday climbing up of that stairs, which was there again, an element of space making in the built environment, and that
Correct.
kind of
Correct. Correct.
reinforces the kind of state of mind that that person could have been in, and it's done
Correct. Correct.
repeatedly, and then
It gave
that
a.
kind
It,
and
yeah.
that's pretty much the most visual example I can give of of
Correct. The
what
stronger
kind of
impact that it created.
the emblematic impact or the kind of the impact
Correct.
that
Correct.
the built environment can have on you. And I think that after seeing that movie, I was really triggered to understand what, like, it really, it's like almost, it was almost like stretching a rubber band to its limits, like that's when he snapped, the rubber band snapped and Joker came out, And
Correct.
if
Correct.
one of the most important protagonists was the built environment and not only Joaquin Phoenix. It's important that you understand it in that way.
Correct. Correct. Sorry, I cut you off before. You're going
Yeah.
to show us another example or two if you want to share
Yeah.
that with.
So the something that I don't know. So everyone says that maybe he's talking a lot about the built environment, but what is exactly happening? So I think some interesting examples that I can talk about, or what this whole kind of study that I've been in and trying to understand, which I kind of narrated briefly to you initially, was we kind of engage in speculative experiments, which are through drawings, understanding, kind of constructing built futurescapes by just drawing them out, engaging in the idea of practice. So mostly, even when I engage with my students, I engage in studio, I engage in the practice of drawing, and drawing becoming the tool for experimenting. And so what we do is, one of the examples that I'm giving is futurescapes. Then we participate in kind of creating scenarios. So futurescapes, I would say that some of the drawings, this is one of the drawings that I had, so I could pull up, is like, so kind of something that is very intuitively produced and kind of intuitively experimented in order to, so this is kind of looking at society as what reenactment and participation, or like understanding what a particular society around like mostly all of us are like reenacting something through our social life and stuff and all.
Okay.
And
Okay.
what can be this kind of landscape, this new landscape of society kind of participating and engaging in them, and just kind of almost speculatively drawing out this futurescape. And then another thing is like, then probably looking at one of this example is like, this is what we call a scenario drawing, is trying to actually see, when you kind of go into the drawing of the futurescape, what are the various scenarios of life, or what are the various scenarios in which participation of life can exist in this kind of, in that futurescape.
Okay.
So, and
Okay.
after
Interesting.
it was a very interesting thing that I recently did with a few set of students with an international workshop in with the University of Antwerp, is that what I wanted to do is like taking it to the other level, like staging. Like if I've drawn out a scenario, and then I want to actually experiment the scenario without really being like, the virtual tools are something very new, and we're trying to see how those could be modeled and can be utilized and be made more crowdsourced so that people can be in them. So what we thought of doing very interestingly was trying to script a scene. So I think most of the drawings that I've shown, or most of these things that I've shown are kind of in on my Instagram profile, so it's there for everyone to. But what this kind of interestingly did was that we could actually put, instead of drawing out a scenario, what we thought was trying to enact a scenario. Like we be as the actors in the scenario. Various things that we kind of, so this was based around the idea of commons, and so we kind of experimented the idea of, understanding how we could, the idea of teleporting from A space to B space without actually physically traveling. So it was called the magic door, and so we called it end of revelation. So it's like this person, almost like it was like a pun on virtuality, where this door is something that he travels with, but it's almost like it's kind of an analogy to the kind of smartphone that we carry. Then he places the door onto the, and then that door is utilized by him to go through, and he comes on to a completely different kind of landscape. And then from the landscape, he sits with this friend who he engages with, and then that's the world beyond for him. And then he can also obviously go vice versa. So this was based on, I should actually say that this was based upon a few interesting works of this photographer called Dwayne Michael, who did, or who kind of engaged in these kind of series of photographs which told a story. So this photograph stops being a static object and starts narrating something else.
Okay. Okay. Now that you mentioned illustration, I think one of our viewers also sort of gave a question before some time back.
Yeah, yeah,
Now, in
yeah.
terms of architecture, how
Yeah.
does artificial intelligence take architecture ahead? How is it going to get involved? How is that going to affect our environment and our state of mind? What's your take on that?
That's. I think that person whoever asked the question should participate with us in the studio because I it's still a question I think which needs a huge answer and which need there are a lot of questions. There are a lot of questions how this kind of affects. But I've been delving with this kind of issue without having a kind of more summarized answer to it since I think 2014. And my master's thesis also was based on the idea of understanding what. So artificial intelligence, or what we call as automation, is something that's a tool that is designed around taking off the drudgery of humans. And the thing, it's almost like Sisyphus' rock. If everyone knows what Sisyphus' rock is, like Sisyphus keeps pushing this rock over the mountain, and the rock kind of rolls down, and then he trying to push that rock
Correct.
again. Basically, that's
Yeah, yeah.
kind of a summary of what we live as life. Okay, so we are continuously, repeatedly doing a particular set of tasks in order to earn a livelihood, and then kind of. What we think that livelihood will bring pleasure, but repeatedly we are like kind of enslaved by that repetitive act, that Sisyphean act of doing. And automation and artificial intelligence somewhere is a tool which is being created out of again human imagination,
Correct,
which in
correct.
order to elevate us from this drudgery of everyday life. And then when we get elevated of drudgery, what do we do is the question which is like the $1,000,000 question. What do we do if
Okay.
we're taken away from drudgery? So whether it's we indulge in continuous pleasure, or I don't know, we go try and figure out, invest more time in trying to figure out what the world beyond does in like space explorations and larger questions of life, or what our origins were, or something like that. So somehow one of the illustrations again, which I think recently I put up on Instagram, is like this was what I drew out, and saying that this was kind of a culmination of my thesis or masters, in which I said maybe. So this was the idea for server farm. Okay, so the whole landscape is taken about the human existence kind of goes back to a place where the natural environment kind of starts regrowing over the built environment that we have. Humans have gone into
Okay.
this like isolation in which only the brain needs to be stimulated with pleasure, and we engage in physical acts of pleasure, but there's nothing more to that. And then
There's
this
nothing
whole
more to it.
landscape is covered by server farms and solar farms, which kind of run this new life of artificial intelligence automation, which kind of does all the drudgery work for us. So there is, like, in this far and beyond of this image, you will see that there is this natural landscape, which is manifested by these technological pods, which kind of take over the natural landscape, but they kind of coexist with the kind of balance that we desire between between technology and the future of
Correct.
technology and the retrospective of the natural environment.
So
And
it's
then
like
we as humans, yeah.
a reimagined new world.
So we as humans kind of live in these like completely almost like if you all have seen the Brave New World, if you've read the George Orwell in 1948, or the
Yeah,
other
yeah.
book, The Brave New World, in which there's this someone eats that pill called soma, and you're in this continuous idea of being simulated in pleasure, is what kind of exists. So if you take away drudgery, what are we left with is that larger question that we need to, I think, like cutting this whole thing, I can keep going on for hours on this, but
Yeah,
kind of
yeah. No, so I guess what we'll do is,
yeah,
see, we have around 15 minutes left. What I'm
yeah,
going to do
yeah,
is there are probably two more questions that we've got from the crowd, which we'll answer towards the end. I just
yeah,
want to conclude regarding our particular two topics that
yeah,
in terms of the built environment, in terms of state of mind, today it's not possible to live only in a stress-free environment or in a place where things are just going to be the way you envisioned it to be. And by
yeah,
by a certain time, I've been reading about these few things about how by 2050 we're expecting at least two-thirds of the global population, to be living in these cities. How is this going to affect, or rather, what would you advise the designers and planners of tomorrow to sort of engage in what kind of thinking and what kind of planning to go ahead and get such environments built out where at least you can somehow salvage, or rather, I would say, make it a more comfortable state of mind for the average human that's going to be staying in these cities.
So yeah, so first thing I think the most important thing I think is the fact that we should be aware. So the whole idea of me talking about this whole thing is that we are aware that the built environment has an impact on us through the state of mind.
Correct. Correct.
We should be aware that we need a particularly conducive built environment which will help us hone the kind of mental state that we require for feeling happy or feeling a particular kind of stimulation that brings about the memories which are right and not the negative memories which bring about depression, anxiety, schizophrenia, whatever those things are. So the fact that we are aware, and then the fact that we in itself are responsive to the fact that if someone is doing something like if the built environment is not right, we need to demand the fact that the built environment needs to be in a particular way. And I think as a responsibility from the part or the profession of building or the profession of urban planning or architecture or urban design and all these kind of things which kind of are professions around the construction of the built environment. I think the fact that we need to utilize the tools, that is exactly what we are like I'm trying to engage through it through practices, that we need to draw them out to totality in order the fact that they can be tested so that there's almost like it's almost like putting out a vaccine today without it going through human trials. I don't know what adverse effects it would have on a person's body. So it's almost analogically talking about the engagement of our profession as well, though it does not it has an impact on the physical sense, it has an impact on the mental sense. So almost it's I think the irresponsiveness with which architecture is being delivered throughout the world or at various places because things need to be produced quickly or whatever the multiple other things that are there or that can happen, that they are being deployed or they're almost being injected in you without them being tested to its totality. So I think we have the tools of engagement. The virtual capsules that I'm talking about are tools in which we can make design more of us rather than them. So more than us, it should become of the collective. So I think testing out what we are proposing, seeing reactions of the sociological masses on it, the imprints in clay, and then shaping that tool by cleaning up the clay and then seeing the final product is what I feel is necessary or is the highest responsibility in today's day. Because living again in the world of the Anthropocene, as I say, the resource that we know, the natural resource that is the earth, is in limited resource, like it's in limited quantity.
Yeah.
And
so I guess also adding to your point of the way you mentioned us to envision these future state of existence and the future planet that is at stake. I think there is also a need of the hour to sort of get visionistic minds together, let people understand how such communities can work together and how this engagement can sort of take a more approach that is not just a two-pronged approach, but more of a multiverse prong approach that can help understand where.
Totally a multidisciplinary challenge. It is absolutely necessary, I think, and the fact that you are creating a platform which is to be able so that people it's to facilitate people who can collaborate and engage.
Correct.
This is very new. This whole thing about understanding mental health and urban design or understanding architecture and neuroscience is a very important. It's a very new thing. It's
correct. Very new.
Happening since the past 7 or 8 years, or maybe maximum 10 years, where people have started to understand the expertise of a neurologist or understanding what those various things could be triggered, and you can do like various brain mappings of people, understanding what those triggers are and seeing how various physical or what do you say, material triggers do to various pockets of your brain, and then
Pockets of the
trying to
brain.
understand those studies, collaborating those studies, integrating those studies in constructing the physicality or the materiality is what I feel is very important in order to be understood, and then associating the expertise that a neurologist has, or a person who understands, a psychologist understands through mental health or various things that can be integrated together. So
Correct,
if
correct.
you have time, there's this very quick small thing that I don't know how long we have, but I think that's quite
Yeah, so
a
I guess, see, the
video
thing is,
conclude.
we usually never spend so much time, as human thinking about so many things in detail. And now that we're so immersed in the daily race as just survive and just sort of go on, that I think now, as a time when something like this virus has given us all the time to think about life, we've gone back to our
Yeah,
older thoughts of what our ancestors left us, stuff like the Vedas, a lot of
yeah,
other cultural, historical
yeah,
aspects that are coming back to us right now. And we're sort of having a small vision in mind about how less is more, how we
yeah,
need a certain need versus want argument. And today, I feel is the right time for the planners and designers of tomorrow to sort of integrate mental health into their work and designs. Because
yeah.
if
I
we
think it
start
should be
understanding,
integrated. Yeah, it has to be integrated in the way in which they practice. That's the
correct,
most important.
correct,
Like this is that, as you rightly said, and it's very well put. That's exactly what I was going to talk. That this is that pause button which we've got now.
correct,
That
correct,
we really need to think: do we need to continue to exist in the way we are, and which are affecting and creating all these complexities mentally, physically, everything, or do we want to stop and then kind of reconfigure and realign and rethink what we want to see as a future state for our life? And this is the point at which we, I think, should stop and like initiate this change rather than, and the fact that
yeah,
the lockdown is proceeding towards opening, I don't have any kind of critical things about it, like economy and all that stuff has to happen. But I think what is happening in the accelerated process of that opening is that we are going back too soon to doing exactly
correct,
what we were doing back then.
correct,
And
correct, correct.
I can't see this opportunity. I can't see this as a larger signal to like stop and take that time off to like reinvent and like rethink.
Correct. Reimagine and rethink.
And
Correct.
that's why I use the word tweak. I don't think we have to go about drastically changing things, but we have to first understand how things can be tweaked in order that
Correct.
it starts doing something different. It's like almost like a play in which, like if there's an Aladdin play and there are some props behind it, which I always give examples to my students about. But like if those props start doing something slightly different, and that play with the actors and their costumes continue to do exactly the same thing, but those props kind of start telling a different story because of the impact. So you need to tweak it just right in
Correct.
order
Correct.
to start
You
saying that
have
new
to.
story.
Yeah. 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 What the audience is gonna now perceive is gonna be different.
Yeah, it's
Okay.
going to be
So
completely different.
I guess we've concluded a lot of points pretty briefly and really well. I think probably one eye is giving a lot of injustice to us talking and engaging in these talks.
I think we
I'm
can.
sure definitely a lot of people are
Yeah,
going to be wanting to connect with you. So Saurabh basically runs Archvision Studio. You all can get in touch with him. Instagram, direct
yeah,
message. He'll
Instagram.
definitely love to. Yeah, he'll definitely love to hear your thoughts and get in touch
Yeah,
with you
yeah,
all.
yeah,
I
definitely.
I just have one very quick question that was there during our conversation.
Mm.
What structure, according to you, is a great example of social design and why? And after you answer this, also like a small conclusive piece of advice or some small story that you want to quickly share with us since we have around 5 minutes left, I guess.
Okay. 5 minutes.
So,
That's good.
first thing,
Okay.
yeah, first thing is what
What do you mean
structure,
by
according to you?
structure of social design is like I have no idea. Uh,
Okay, I'll definitely, okay, we'll get back to that over
I think
email.
that's a YouTube. It's always going to be like, to answer it very kind of cockily, I would say it's always going to be a utopia. It's like there's no way in which any kind of social structure there is no idea of completeness. I don't think. And
Hmm,
that's exactly the most interesting thing. Why we humans continue, even if the drudgery is taken away, we will continue to find an answer to that particular question. Is because there will never be an idea of completely perfect. But what we
correct,
can try
correct,
and do
correct.
is kind of get the factors which are correct to the highest possible percentage, and then reduce the factors which are like to the least desired percentage that we require, and then that
Correct.
can somehow start bringing us closer to a possible manifestation of utopia. And then maybe this is one of the like I can kind of explain this in an interesting way, as you mentioned a story or something like that, that I feel is very interesting, is something that always lingered with me. It's something that my mentor told me like about 10 years back, and it's always lingered with me. Is that the fact that like the again is the built environment and the our existence in it, and then just imagine like there's a pool of water in like the rainforest, okay, and the pool of water keeps building up, okay, as the rainfall happens, okay, and then there are fish which start growing in it because the microorganism in that kind of develops, and there are these fishes which kind of exist in it, and they keep growing. And then at some point the rain stops and the kind of pond kind of starts receding, and it starts depleting, and it kind of starts becoming smaller. But the number of fish in the pond kind of remains the same. Okay. And
Correct.
then
Correct. Correct.
what happens? That they kind of literally they're gasping for breath, and then they're kind of dying out. And then it happens over a period of time. And because it's a cyclic process, and then keeps happening, keeps happening, keeps happening.
Yeah, it's a
Till the
loop.
point
Yeah.
of which till the point of which at one point there is this cry for the lung that the fish will have. There's a cry for the lung where it kind of really wants to like kind of evolve, like our kind of DNA kind of wants to change in order that it wants to have lungs. Okay. And then that it's either that fish finds a physical possibility of containing the water in itself, and like creating that built environment so that he can continue to exist, or he has to
Exist.
evolve,
Evolve further.
in order to have lungs, in order to breathe without the help of water. And then
Wow.
that's
Yeah.
maybe one of the stories which says that maybe tadpoles were born, and then that cry for lung of one fish might have created a tadpole, which then became an amphibian into a swan and stuff. But this is so
Interesting.
relevant to us, is that pond for us is reducing, is depleting, and we are all in that same pond, sharing that same water. And
Wow.
if we either have to find one way of containing that water and staying in it, or we
Or
have
we
to
have to
physically
adapt.
evolve, or we have to physically evolve in order that it
Correct.
change, that
Correct.
we change, in order that we succumb to what we think is the constructed built environment, and we succumb to it, and then accept that as the natural environment, and then evolve in it. So
Evolve further.
it's a very, I think that can linger with everyone for a while and understand what that means, because the is lingering
Yeah.
with me since over 10 years, and I think if it's in the back of your mind, it will always drive you to a
Correct.
question,
Correct.
or being
It'll
more
help you
aware.
perceive. Yeah. Yeah. It'll help you perceive your thoughts in a particular manner. I guess that sort of very well concludes and inspires a lot of people, I'm assuming, a lot of thoughts and engagement that can probably take place. Uh, so I guess what we can do is, taking on that note that you just said, the small story that you mentioned to us, we should be taking this opportunity to sort of rethink, sort of understand how to ideate and create better, keeping in mind people's well-being, not only physical but also the mental well-being, as you mentioned. And I guess that should be enough inspiration for all of us to sort of go ahead and look forward to what life is gonna shape
Yeah,
into.
yeah.
I guess we'll take a conclusion right now because we're gonna
Just a conclusion, and
Instagram's.
maybe, yeah, just a quick thing that I can say, that almost look at what I narrated from the Neolithic man to the space station as a pH scale. As a pH scale, like it's like acidic and basic, and then or alkaline, and then natural environment to built environment, and what
Built environment.
almost like a pH scale. And then we should
Wow.
always
Yeah. Yeah.
evaluate our envelope of the environment around us in that pH scale, and try to look at it in that way. And then I
Nice.
think
Nice.
that's
Okay.
great.
Thank you. Thank you so
And,
much, Saurabh.
yeah,
We have
it
only
didn't feel like
25
an hour.
seconds.
Yeah, it didn't feel like an hour, but thank you so much for having me, and then we can do it once more. Yeah.
All right. All right.
And enjoy
So
your Friday.
thank you so much.
And
Yeah,
back to
definitely.
ourselves. Back to ourselves
Back
of
to
hunting.
ourselves. Back to ourselves. All right. Take care, and I hope all of you all had a entertaining interactive session. Namaste. Thank you. Take care, Saurabh.
Cheers. Thank you. Bye.